Has anyone in here ever heard of the word adiaphorus? Yes. Do you know what it means? Okay, I didn't expect that, and that's okay. I'm going to teach you guys a new word. So adiaphorus, by definition, it means something that's indifferent or neutral. Okay, so something that can be described in this way, indifferent or neutral, by itself, in and of itself, it's not necessarily good, it's not necessarily right, but at the same time, by itself, it's not necessarily bad or wrong. It just kind of is. And I came across this comic earlier this week. I think it kind of illustrates it well. So this guy's sick. He goes to the doctor. He gets medicine. But then he goes back and he said, this medicine you gave me is plain water. All right, so this guy's sick. He needs medicine, but the doctor gives him water. So not necessarily what he needs to help him get over his sickness, but it's also not going to hurt him, right? It's just kind of neutral. It just is. The reason I tell you this is because I think there's a lot of things in our world that can be described in this way, that can be looked at as neutral things. One of the biggest things, I think, for us is social media. I think social media by itself, in and of itself, is a very neutral thing. Social media can be a really good thing. Social media can also be a really bad thing. And what makes that difference and distinction is how people choose to use it. Another example of this is your phone. Okay, your phone by itself, just as it is, it's a neutral thing. But you can use your phone in a way that makes it a really good thing or a really bad thing. Another example is popularity. Okay, people that are popular, have popularity, they can use that for a really good thing, and it can be a good thing, but they can also use that pretty poorly. It can affect them, and it can end up being a bad thing. But by itself, it just is what it is. Another example of this, I think, is our doubts about God. I think that in and of itself, our doubts about God are a pretty neutral thing. Just as they are, when we have doubts, they're not necessarily a really good thing, but they're not a bad thing either. Our doubts can actually be a really good thing for us if we choose to respond to our doubts and use our doubts in the right way, but they can also become a negative thing in our lives and for our faith if we choose to respond to them and act from them in a negative way. But by themselves, I think our doubts are a pretty neutral thing. And the reality is that we all have doubts about God. Maybe you wouldn't necessarily categorize all of them as doubts, but all of us have questions about God. We have questions about faith. We have questions about the Bible. All of us, in some way, shape, or form, we have something about our faith, about God, that we just don't understand. We don't feel like we have the answers to. I mean, this morning, I was sitting in church, and Pastor Philbeck even admitted this, right? He said, I have questions about God. It's like, if he has questions about God, then I know all of us have questions about God. But the question is, what do we do with our doubts about God? And my fear is that I think a lot of us have believed the lie that if we want to be a Christian, if we want to be a strong Christian, if we want to follow God and pursue him, then we can't have any doubts. We can't have any questions. We have to have it all figured out. We have to know everything. We can't have any ounce of doubt if we want to be a Christian. And so what's the answer? Are we allowed to have doubts? Are we allowed to doubt God at times? Are we allowed to have questions about the Bible? But the biggest question that I want to answer tonight is, how can we make sure that our doubts can be a good thing? How can we respond in a way that can actually make our doubts a positive thing for our faith and for our life? And so we're going to continue talking about beyond belief. We're going to continue talking about doubts and questions, and we're going to be looking at the story of Moses, journeying through the book of Exodus, continuing to look at the story of Moses to see what we can learn about this. And if you were here last week, we talked about doubting yourself. Okay, so Moses, the beginning of his story, God says that he sees the Israelites. The Israelites are oppressed and enslaved in Egypt. God says he sees the Israelites. He sees where they are, and he says it's time to deliver them and free them from the slavery that they're in, and he says that he wants to use Moses to do this. But if you know the story, or if you were here last week, you know that Moses has some pretty big doubts. He doubts himself. He doubts his abilities. He doubts what God can do through him. He doubts his contribution. He just has a lot of doubts. But eventually Moses ends up getting on board with the plan, and he's going to follow through with what God wants him to do. And we're going to pick up in this story tonight, looking at what happens when this gets set into motion. And so we're going to start in Exodus 5, but we're really going to kind of be flying over Exodus 5, 6, and 7. And so if you have a phone or a Bible app, I would encourage you to have that so you can follow along with us. If not, the scripture will be on the screen as well, but we're just going to kind of fly over a few chapters and see what we can learn about Moses in his story. And so tonight, where we're picking up God's plan is starting to get set into motion. Okay, so God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh, and he tells Moses to tell Pharaoh that it's time to let the people of Israel go. It's time to free them and let them go. And it seems like Moses was expecting this to happen right away. But we're going to see that's not exactly how it plays out. And so Exodus 5, verses 1 through 5, here's what it says. After this presentation to Israel's leaders, Moses and Aaron went and spoke to Pharaoh. They told him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go so they may hold a festival in my honor in the wilderness." "Is that so?" retorted Pharaoh. "And who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." But Aaron and Moses persisted. "The God of the Hebrews has met with us," they declared. "So let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so we can offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we don't, he will kill us with a plague or with the sword." Pharaoh replied, "Moses and Aaron, why are you distracting the people from their task? Get back to work. Look, there are many of your people in the land, and you are stopping them from their work." And so Pharaoh, in this scenario, he doesn't instantly listen to Moses and let the people go like Moses was kind of expecting. What he actually does, if you would read the rest of chapter 5, is he actually ups the punishment for the Israelites. So he ups their workload. He makes the workload harder. He puts harsher demands on them. Basically does the exact opposite of what Moses thought he was going to do. And so if we skip to the end of chapter 5, we see Moses' response to this situation, and really pay attention to these verses because it's going to set the stage for the rest of the night. So verses 22 and 23, it says, "Then Moses went back to the Lord and protested. 'Why have you brought all this trouble on your own people, Lord? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesperson, he has been even more brutal to your people, and you've done nothing to rescue them.'" Moses here, he's in a rough place. Why did you do this? Why did you send me? Why did you tell me to demand this from Pharaoh? You're not showing up. You're not doing what you said you would do. What are you doing? Moses is doubting God in some big and significant ways here. A couple chapters ago, he was doubting himself. Now he's doubting God. He's doubting the plan of God. And the question that we need to answer is, what do we do now? Because at some point or another, all of us are going to find ourselves in the same exact situation that Moses is in here. When we have doubts, when we have questions, when we don't understand what's going on. And so when we're in this place, what do we do? That's what I want to talk about tonight. And here's the first thing that I want to take away from the story of Moses, is that we need to remain faithful even when doubting. Remain faithful even when we have doubts and questions. We clearly see, hopefully you've been able to clearly see that Moses has a lot of doubts and questions. He's wrestling with a lot. He's kind of going through it. He starts by doubting himself. Now he's doubting God, and he's doubting the whole plan. But what we have to recognize is that Moses stays faithful through all of this. So now we're skipping on to chapter 6. Through chapter 6, there's some back and forth between Moses and God. They have some conversations. God tells Moses to now go to the Israelites, the people, and tell them that God is going to free them. And so Moses goes to the people, the Israelites, and here's how it unfolds. Chapter 6, verses 9 through 12. It says, "So Moses told the people of Israel what the Lord had said, but they refused to listen anymore. They'd become too discouraged by the brutality of their slavery. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go back to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and tell him to let the people of Israel leave his country.' 'But Lord,' Moses objected, 'my people won't listen to me anymore. How can I expect Pharaoh to listen to me? I'm such a clumsy speaker.'" So again, Moses is in this point where he's doubting God. He's doubting himself. He doesn't believe in the plan of God. He has questions. But now we see this happen in the very next chapter, chapter 7, verse 6. It says, "So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded." Verse 10, "So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did what the Lord had commanded." Verse 20, "So Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded." Moses did what the Lord had commanded, even though he was wrestling with doubts and questions and his faith and didn't know what was going on, didn't have certainty or trust in God. He still remained faithful in those moments. So what does this mean? What does this look like for us? It means that following God doesn't mean that we have to have all the answers. Following God doesn't mean that we can't have any questions. Following God doesn't mean that we're not allowed to have any doubts or any questions about God. We can have questions about God. We can have doubts, our faith. We can be confused at times and at the same time still follow God. We don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to have this ideal, perfect faith to be able to follow God. We can have these questions and doubts and not understand everything and at the same time still follow God. The Bible is filled with people like this, filled with people that have doubts, that have questions, that don't understand it, but yet through this, a lot of them still stay faithful and pursue God. And so what I want to tell you tonight is don't let your doubts paralyze your faith. Don't let your doubts stop you from pursuing God. Don't let the doubts and the questions that you have stop you from chasing after God and pursuing him and seeking him and staying faithful and obedient to him. Don't let your doubts become a roadblock between you and your relationship with God, because they shouldn't be. You have doubts, that's fine, that's okay. You can have those doubts, but continue to move forward. Continue to chase after God. Continue to pursue him. Continue to go to small group and come to engage and go to church. Do all of these things. And a lot of times, I can't guarantee this, but a lot of times when we do that, when we continue to stay faithful, we'll find answers to some of the questions that we're asking. Our faith will grow and mature, and we'll have answers to the questions that we're asking. But when you have doubts, stay faithful. Keep moving forward. Keep pursuing God. Keep praying for wisdom, right? James chapter 1 tells us to pray for wisdom when we lack it or when we need it. Don't let the doubts that you have, don't let the questions that you have derail your faith or become a roadblock in your faith. Keep pursuing, keep chasing answers to those questions as you go, but don't let those doubts destroy your faith. Stay faithful. Moses, we see he had some serious doubts. He had questions. He didn't understand a lot what was going on, but he stayed faithful and continued to pursue God in that, and we can do the same. The second thing that I want us to see from this text is that our doubts don't disqualify us. Our doubts do not disqualify us. This is huge. This is a huge part of the story. We read in our last point about how God told Moses to go back to Pharaoh, right, and tell him that it's time to let the people go, but Moses actually objects because he doesn't think that he's going to listen. Well, if we look at the end of chapter 6, God and Moses are again having a conversation, and here's what it says. It says, "When the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, he said to him, 'I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, everything that I am telling you.' But Moses argued with the Lord, saying, 'I can't do it. I'm such a clumsy speaker. Why should Pharaoh listen to me?'" Now, it seems like Moses and God have had this conversation 5 or 10 times by now. They keep going back and forth, and it seems like they keep having this conversation. But what I want us to pay attention to this time is God's response to this. Okay, so in this text, Moses is doubting. He's questioning everything once again. Now we see God's response in the very next verse, chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. It says this, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Pay close attention to this. I will make you seem like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. Tell Aaron everything I command you, and Aaron must command Pharaoh to let the people of Israel leave his country.'" Now, this might seem like a insignificant piece of scripture, but I don't think that it is, because Moses is at the point, once again, where he's doubting everything. He doesn't believe in God or the plan, and he expresses multiple times about how he doesn't think that it's going to basically work out. And now God comes to him, and he basically lays out the entire plan. I think this is important because there's a lot of things in this scenario that I think God could have done. I think God could have easily just discarded Moses and said, "Fine, you don't believe, you don't have faith, that's fine, get out. I'll find somebody that believes in me and wants to do what I want them to do." He could have disowned him, he could have punished him, he could have went off, like he could have done anything that he wanted to do, but we see that he responds in a way that actually welcomes Moses' doubts and questions. He sees Moses, he sees his doubts, he sees him as he is, he sees what he's wrestling with and what he's going through, and he slows down and he actually speaks truth and life into the doubts that Moses has. He stops and he says, "Pay close attention to this. Here's what's going to happen." And through this, he makes an effort to ease Moses' doubts and give him confidence by explaining the plan, exactly how it's going to happen. And if you would read the rest of the verses, you would see that God explains what's going to happen. And we know that Moses ends up responding with faithfulness. But if I can take it a step further, God doesn't just once again explain the plan, but he actually re-emphasizes the fact that he's going to use Moses to carry this out. He's going to continue to send Moses to Pharaoh to carry out this plan. And you might be familiar with this story, but what ends up happening is God sends these 10 different plagues on the land of Egypt. These plagues wreak havoc on the land of Egypt, on the Egyptian people. It does a lot of crazy things. it's a very interesting story, so you can go back and read it. But the first thing he does is he turns the Nile River into blood. Okay, and this destroys their livelihood, their way of life. Then he sends frogs and gnats and flies to completely cover the land and cover the people. After this, he kills the livestock of the Egyptian people. But what's interesting is that the livestock of the Israelites are not affected and are not harmed. So he continues to protect his people. And you can read the rest of them, the plagues that he sends. And after all these plagues, Pharaoh doesn't just let the people of Israel go. He actually goes to Moses and he kicks them out. He goes to Moses and he tells him to just get out, leave, go, take your people, just get out of here. I don't want this anymore. And please pay attention to this because we can't overlook the significance of this. These people are God's people. They've been in Egypt. They've been enslaved and oppressed for over 400 years, and now God delivers them, and he chooses to use Moses to deliver them. He chooses to use the guy that didn't believe in himself. He chooses to use the guy that had doubts about God and the plan, that didn't believe that any of it could happen. He chooses to use the guy that probably had more doubts than faith. He doesn't disqualify him for his faith, or for his doubts. He continues to use him despite his doubts. And that's the truth that we need to hold on to. It's that God does not disqualify us when we have doubts. He doesn't forget about us. He doesn't think less of us. He doesn't love us any less. He doesn't change the plans that he has for our lives. He doesn't punish us. Our doubts and our questions about God and faith, they don't change the love that God has for us. And that's the beauty of the gospel. On one side, the beauty of the gospel is that there's nothing we can do to earn or deserve God's love. But on the other side, on the flip side of that coin, there's nothing that we can do to lose the love of God. Right? There's nothing that we can do to make God love us any more, and there's also nothing we can do to make God love us any less. And so when we have doubts and questions, God's love for us does not change. He continues to pursue us. He continues to love us. He continues to bless us and chase after us. He doesn't disqualify us when we have doubts and questions. He's still going to be working in your life. He's still going to be preparing a future for you. He's still going to guide you and lead you and bless you. Your doubts and your questions, they don't change any of that. We need to hold on to that truth. We need to understand that truth tonight. Our doubts do not disqualify us from the love and the life that God has for us. Here's the last point that I want to talk about. It's that asking questions can lead to breakthrough. Asking questions can lead to breakthrough. Hopefully by this point, you understand and you believe that it's okay to have doubts and questions. Okay, and if you haven't heard that or you don't believe that now. It's okay to have doubts and questions. But the most important thing is what we do with those doubts and questions, right? What we talked about at the beginning with the adiaphorus thing. If our doubts are truly a neutral thing by themselves, then what we do with our doubts is what make them a really good thing or a really bad thing. And one thing that we can do is ask questions, and I believe that asking questions can lead to breakthrough. What I mean by this is that asking questions can lead to breakthrough in our faith. When we allow the doubts that we have to push us to find answers, to ask questions, to seek wise counsel, when we allow our doubts to move us to do something, our faith can be transformed. Our faith can go to new depths. We can have a stronger and a deeper and a richer faith when we allow that to happen. Our doubts can actually transform our faith and be one of the best things for our faith if we allow it to push us to ask questions and to seek answers. And so I have some tips and suggestions of what I think are important to keep in mind when you have doubts and questions and you're wrestling through this. I don't have time to talk about all of them, so this is something that you're going to talk about more in your small groups, but I at least want to mention them to you guys. And so this first list is things that I think that you should avoid when you have doubts and questions, okay? The first is that you need to avoid doubting with other doubters. Some of you may have heard this before. If you haven't, what this means is when you have doubts and questions, don't surround yourself with other people that have those same doubts and questions. You need to surround yourself with people that are seeking those answers and want to find the answers to those questions. But if you have doubts and you're walking with people that also have those same doubts, then there's a really good possibility that those doubts are just going to grow and you're never going to find the answers to the questions that you have. Avoid burying them and not talking about them. Okay, don't suppress them. Don't hide them and put them under a blanket and not talk about them. Don't act like you don't have them. Don't do nothing with the doubts and don't think of yourself less for having them. Okay, so these are things that I think you should avoid. But here's some things that I think that you should do, and I would urge you and encourage you to do. The first is pray about them. Okay, when you have doubts and questions about God, pray about them. Like I said earlier, James 1:5, it talks about if you lack wisdom, if you want wisdom, then go to God and ask for it, and he'll give it to you. Okay, so pray about the doubts that you have. Do your own research. Go to Scripture. Study Scripture. Try to find the answers. But then two of the biggest things that I would also say is talk to someone about them. Talk to someone about the doubts and questions that you have, and ask someone who you trust. Ask these questions. Talk about them with someone that you trust. And that's really what our bottom line and main takeaway for tonight is that when you doubt, it's okay to ask questions. And more than it being just okay, I would strongly encourage and urge all of you, when you have doubts, ask questions. And I know that there can be some fear in that, right? If you're in a small group setting, you don't always want to be the person asking question because you don't want the group to think that you don't know the answer or that you don't want the group to judge you. But odds are other people in the group have the same question, and so be bold, ask that question. But if what we started the night talking about is true, if our doubts are a neutral thing, then what really matters is what we do with them. And so allow your doubts, allow the questions that you're wrestling with, move you and push you to ask questions and seek answers. Because the thing is, if you suppress these things, if you bury them and hide them, and you never ask anyone the questions, you never seek answers to the questions that you have, and then you leave this place, you go off to college or you go into the real world and start working, and you still have these doubts and you haven't dealt with them, then odds are those doubts will destroy your faith. But the flip side of this is true. If you have these doubts right now and you have these questions and you allow these doubts to move you to answers, then they can be the very thing that strengthen and deepen your faith and take your faith and your relationship with God to new depths. But the biggest thing, the biggest difference in those two scenarios is what you do with your doubts. So ask questions, seek answers, allow your doubts to be something that can transform your faith. So what I want to do is I want to put this into practice tonight, right now. And so if you've noticed, you have a note card and a pencil under your seat. And if you have a doubt or a question about God, about faith, about the Bible, about anything related to any of this, I want you to write that question down on your note card. Okay, you're not going to turn your note card in. You're going to keep it and you're going to take it to small group with you. And the first thing you'll do in small group is actually have a time where you can ask this question and talk about it a little bit. If you don't have a question or a doubt that's on the forefront of your mind, then don't write anything. Just you can sit there and pray silently. But we want to create a space where you can ask these questions that you're wrestling with. And so if you've got one, in a minute I'm going to pray. After I pray, you'll have a little bit of time to write those questions down and then take those to small group with you.